Everyone is right now.
Maybe. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Enterprise Committee meeting. It is the last committee enterprise meeting of the year, November 8th, here at about 1:30 p.m. I have with me at the dais Councilmember Alondra Cano, who's the vice chair of this committee, council members Fletcher and Reich. We are a quorum of this committee, and we are authorized to do the business of this committee. We have a busy agenda this afternoon, in part because it's the last meeting of the year. This has been adjusted on future calendars for the remainder of the term, such that we have an enterprise meeting in December. So thank you to our clerk, Kelly Giesler, for helping us figure that out for the future. As we look at the agenda before us, I'd like to, as chair, make a couple of modifications. The last discussion item, number 12, our regular coordinator's monthly update, is going to be brief, and thus we're going to hear from Coordinator Rivera Vandermeide first, after our consent agenda is dispensed with. Also, I'm disappointed to share that after much conversation about an improved set of employee benefits that could really modernize and, I feel, provide real tangible changes for our employees, we've run into some last-minute concerns from union leadership partners. So I know this comes as a disappointment to many that have been working on this, including our city's 29% group. But without objection from those at the dais, I would like to move to postpone this item to the February 7th enterprise session, just to give a little bit more time and have more conversation about that. Is that all right with others? I promise to continue working with our union partners on these matters. So with that, our consent agenda items today. Item number 1 is a contract with Hennepin County for use of pictometry license. Item number 2 is a contract with B2G to provide and implement compliance management system software. It's a 5-year contract with the 2 additional 1-year terms as per standard. Item number 3 is a contract with Everlaw for e-discovery and redaction systems. Item number 4 is a contract with Premier Global Services for teleconferencing services. Item number 5 is a contract with PCG for business impact analysis consulting services engagement. As just to remind people, that was as a result of an audit that was done over this past year, and I know it's of high priority to our IT department, so I appreciate the follow through on that. Item number 6 is a contract with multiple ServiceNow vendors for an IT ServiceNow consulting pool establishment. Item number 7 is contract with various vendors for IT staff augmentation consulting pools. Are there any questions or concerns? Would anyone like to pull any of these items off the consent agenda? Seeing none, those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Also wanted to welcome Councilmember Warsami, who's just joined us as well. So with that, the City Coordinator's monthly update from Coordinator Rivera Vandermeide or her deputy, Andrea Larson.
Obviously not Nuria. I'm Andrea Larson, Director of Strategic Management in the Coordinator's Office. And I'm going to provide a couple updates on some of the work that our office is doing on specifically the Bloomberg Climate Challenge, Strategic and Racial Equity Action Planning, and then our recast grant. As many of you know, Bloomberg Philanthropies and Minneapolis named Minneapolis among its American Cities Climate Challenge winners, along with St. Paul, for resources and technical support to help achieve our ambitious climate goals. Minneapolis and St. Paul were both named winning cities. This is a really exciting partnership, a partnership that the grantors looked very favorably on, and so we are excited to be doing this together. Bloomberg will provide the winners, so both Minneapolis and St. Paul, with a support valued at $2.5 million per city. This support includes some combination of technical assistance or consulting support, and then a variety of grants that are focused on specific efforts. Some of the high-level things that we're planning to focus on include improving transit reliability, encouraging new mobility options, and implementing a comprehensive citywide solar strategy. The next steps are that the challenge kicks off in Pittsburgh on December 3rd. Kim Havey and Heidi Ritchie are going to be attending that conference. There's also going to be coordinated local events on the same date, so on December 3rd across the country, including here in Minneapolis. Heidi is coordinating outreach for that event. All council members and staff will be invited, you may also invite others that you feel are important for the effort. So if you have anyone you'd like to be invited to that event, please don't hesitate to reach out to Heidi with those suggestions. The city is working on specific scope of services for this challenge and plans to bring a contract through January of 2019. Strategic and racial equity action planning. We are planning to bring a more thorough update on this to the Committee of the Whole on November 15th, and then hopefully a first draft to the December 5th Committee of the Whole. So this will be a very light update on where we're at with that. But we've just finished a series of 2-day operational planning sessions. Around 4 out of the 5 components that GARE recommends, GARE Government Alliance on Race and Equity, recommends including in a racial equity action plan, and this includes using racially disaggregated data, workforce diversity, spend diversity, and engaging diverse communities. The sessions went really well. There was attendance from people across the enterprise, every department. We were able to leverage a new tool. The tool used was called the Metrics of Urgency. And this allowed us to take a look at the specific processes we use within each of those 4 components and identify the most pressing steps in the process for us to focus on, and then develop action items to move the work forward. So like I said, we'll be sharing some of this. We just finished up our last session on Tuesday, and so are in the progress of putting this together into a plan to bring that forward soon. And then additional work is happening on setting time aside for vision work and additional policy work with the council, building off of what happened with you all on September 20th. Recast. So as you know, Recast Minneapolis is a federally funded grant program that looks at growing enterprise and community capacity to foster resilience by addressing root cause of trauma, institutional racism. The structure of Recast centers on community-developed strategic plan that directs the work and the allocation of resources under the program. There's an advisory team comprised of city staff and agency partners that worked on developing and implementing the strategic plan. We are in the beginning of the 3rd year of a potentially 5-year program. We just wrapped up our annual report for year 2. Year 1 was primarily a planning year. Year 2 is the first major implementation year with significant focus on youth leadership development, deepening city staff and resident understanding of trauma and methods to address trauma, and then creating critical pathways for community decision-making in the program, including the city's first fully fledged participatory budgeting process. While year 2 focused heavily on healing work, year 3 is the first of 2 sustainability years where we will deepen focus on policy-based systems change with Recast. The Division of Race and Equity will be hiring a program manager in the coming weeks to provide greater leadership in this area by building upon the first 2 years of success. Those are a couple programs to highlight. Are there any questions I can answer?
Thank you. Are there any questions, thoughts? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we're going to move on to the State of Data report. This is something that we've put off a couple of times just to allow for more information, and I'm really excited that we get to bring this forward today. You know, how we create and how we share and how we understand data in our city is really important. And this report is fairly extensive. I think that next year we'll talk more about some of the funding that might be needed to take this to the next level. But this report and this presentation is the product of a cross-departmental team that's focused on how we can leverage data as an asset to better inform decision-making, both within the city as well as externally, along with the people that we are partnered with in the community and the community as a whole. The report is going to summarize some past initiatives, but importantly, speak to how we can envision a future that we will use data to drive decision-making. So I'd like to ask that council members perhaps hold their questions until staff has completed the presentation, just in the interest of time. I have allowed for up to 30 minutes for this agenda item. So with that, I'll recognize our city clerk, Mr. Carl, to help kick off our presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Casey Carl, and I have the privilege of serving as city clerk for the city of Minneapolis. I'm here with a team that represents the multiple departments that the chair mentioned have been engaged in the production of this report, the first State of Data report. The team includes Deputy Chief Information Officer Beth Cousins, our Communications Director Greta Bergstrom, Andrea Larson, Director of Strategic Management from the City Coordinator's Office, Errol Kilkson, the Director of Data and Analytical Services from the IT Department, Deb Parker, our Director of IT Security Services, Kristen Rummelhoff, the Director of our Records and Information Management Division, and we've also been supported in this work by Pam Helf and JP Heisel from the IT Department, Jordan Gilgenbach from the Communications Department, Laura Lynn Sandkamp from the Coordinator's Office, and Mary Zenzen, Manager of the Police Department's Records Services. Thomas Jefferson said that information is the currency of democracy, and this is true. The information that's created, collected, and compiled by governments preserve the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. They enable the public to hold government accountable for its decisions and its actions, and they chronicle our shared experiences as communities, states, and nations. And as a consequence, government information constitutes one of the foundational pillars of a democracy. And this has formed our thesis while preparing this report, that government data is a strategic asset, but an asset often misunderstood and underutilized. This first State of Data report describes how data has been and is used in and by the city of Minneapolis today, and how that use of data as a strategic lever is evolving into the future. Our hope is that by building on successes from the past, the city can improve its use of information assets to drive data-driven decision-making and embed a culture of smarter and better data use. To begin, it's important to ground ourselves in the legal framework that regulates government data. As shown on this slide, in the state of Minnesota, there are 3 laws which form the basic framework for determining why and how government data are created, managed, and made available. And this includes the Official Records Act, which prescribes what data governments must create, collect, and compile. The Records Management Statute, which regulates how government data must be managed, maintained, and disposed of across identified life cycles, and the Data Practices Act, which classifies government data in order to determine who may access the data and under what conditions. The Data Practices Act also declares, as a matter of general state policy, a broad presumption that government data are, by default, public and must be open and accessible to the public. At that same time, however, the law imposes an equal and compelling obligation on government to prevent the disclosure of any data not classified as public. These twin accountabilities create within the law a tension between providing easy access to government data, which is classified as public, while at the same time preventing the release of data not classified as public, in respect of personal privacy, security, and confidential matters. In 2015, the internal auditor examined the city's governance of data as well as its adherence to statutory requirements related to data management. That audit used a set of measures created by ARMA International, referred to as the Information Governance Maturity Model, which draws on extant standards, industry best practices, and legal or regulatory requirements. On a 5-point scale, where 3 is the minimum acceptable ranking that shows legal compliance and satisfactory management of data, the city of Minneapolis achieved a score of 1.65. Perhaps the most critical finding from the audit was the lack of an adequate governance structure to ensure accountability. In the absence of a clear framework of governance and accountability, the audit noted that the city's existing policies and programs with respect to information governance were disjointed, often advanced without regard for the larger impact on the city enterprise. As a result, in 2017, the council enacted the Information Governance Ordinance. That ordinance established an operational framework intended to ensure direct line-of-sight accountability for information and data governance from the city's elected policymakers through an Information Governance Policy Committee composed of key department executives and then across the enterprise. As shown on the right side of this slide, The Information Governance Ordinance identifies 3 interrelated spheres of influence within which improvements can be made to address the deficiencies found in the 2015 audit. These include governance issues, such as enterprise policies and procedures, as well as audit and compliance mechanisms to monitor and evaluate performance. Operational issues like retention plans, security protocols, modern systems, and other resources available to help departments equip themselves to manage data effectively, and support issues, primarily linked to the centralization of core functions to support the enterprise. The Information Governance Policy Committee has identified and prioritized a number of needs to address the issues from that audit, and it has created a number of multi-department work groups of subject matter experts to explore information risk management, data incident response, data use and analytics, as well as a thorough review of the existing policies already in place to determine how we might make improvements across the enterprise. But that's what's happening today. And in order to appreciate how we got here, we need to look back over some of the past actions that led to this current state. To do that, I want to briefly summarize some of the city's major efforts between the years 2000 and 2014, and these accomplishments are found in the report we've provided you on pages 6 to 14. In 2003, the City of Minneapolis adopted an Enterprise Information Management Policy, or as we call it, EIM. It was a groundbreaking policy at that time because it established for the first time a formal policy expression that data was an asset of the city. It was a pioneering approach to the challenges of managing government data in an organization as large and complex as the City of Minneapolis. An important underlying concept of EIM was the recognition that information had value and that, as a consequence, it also presented an operational risk to the enterprise. By emphasizing the value of data across identified life cycles, EIM helped to embed important principles about information management into the fabric of departmental operations. In fact, starting in 2006, in conjunction with the then new Results Minneapolis initiative, department business plans were required to address EIM policies to ensure that information assets were managed effectively. EIM was a success in many respects. It created a very broad framework within which the IT department was able to craft an enterprise technology strategy. It raised awareness about the importance of data management and the capacity of data to transform and improve operations. And building on several successes in policy, people, processes, and programs, the IT department itself was transformed. Its role evolved from core data processing, storage, and network administrator functions to include a greater emphasis on data capture, collaboration, analysis, and visualization. Ultimately, however, the EIM policy was unsuccessful, primarily because despite being adopted as a council policy, funding was never allocated specifically to support it. The lack of funding and policymaker support led departments to question the value of the EIM policy, and the policy itself, though quite impressive, was too academic in its approach, and it lacked very practical applications for departments to use. It was aspirational, but not practical. In the end, EIM fizzled out, lacking funding and other resources, lacking executive sponsorship, and lacking enterprise buy-in. In the absence of those necessary investments, though, the enterprise was set up for the findings that were included in that 2015 audit I already mentioned. With the Information Governance Ordinance, though, the city has committed to a fresh and in many ways refreshed approach to information governance and data management. As we have re-examined the lessons from the past, we've also tried to simplify our approach. By stripping down to essentials, the team has developed a working model for how we, as an enterprise, can advance data strategy moving forward to be successful. This new model, a new paradigm for how we envision data as a platform for change, is the focus of the rest of this report. And with that, I will introduce Errol Kilkson, the Director of our Data Analytics Services within the Information Technology Department.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Kilkson.
Thank you. As Casey mentioned, my name is Errol Kilkson, Director in IT of Data Analytics Services. And we want to start off by, we went through and talked about data as data, but that's not the full thing. What we want to look at is the people, how they interact with the data, how they collect the data, how they use the data to make decisions, and and how do we make relationships with the public and other businesses using that data as a tool for us to interact. So we start off, to boil this down, we want to look at the very basic framework which Casey alluded to, which is create, share, and understand. Currently, we have an issue where people have a little bit of issue with trust in the data, accessibility with the data. There's a feeling that there isn't quite the transparency because it isn't as easy to share the data with the public. Our intention with using this framework is get to the state where we have confidence in the data. We can actually easily have access to the information. The data is of higher quality, and the public is a partner in the decisions because we can easily share this data. That state that we get to can be achieved through this framework, and it's characterized by basic elements of being a trustworthy, intentional, available data sets and to build our transparency. With those four characteristics, we can move forward and get towards our analytic goals as a city. So if we look at the basic framework and think about the create, share, and understanding framework that we have, let's tie some of the things that we do, some of the things that are familiar that we do at the city. For example, we collect the information. People go out, do inspections, they do the inspections and they record it. That inspection becomes data. That data is relevant at that moment of doing the inspection, communicating to the house, the apartment, or whatever that was inspected, but it also is something that we want to use down the line. It's something that we can use to get a better understanding of what's happened on a broader time frame in areas and things such as that. So what we want to do is make sure that we also collect that data in a way that's useful, and that's where we move into governance. And governance means not only are we appropriately collecting data and not collecting information, but when we do collect that information, we put it in a way that we can protect it so that perhaps the information is only appropriate for a small set because of people, because it's relevant to their business line, the work that they do. Well, it's not appropriate for others, because we need to remember that we need to protect the privacy of the subjects of the information. So as we move across, after identifying what's appropriate data, collecting it in a way that's consistent so that we can use it, we want to make sure that our intentional designs of the data marts and the tools are in the center. That's how we would protect the data. Data security, data architecture, and accessibility. Once pulling that information together, the users can actually have access to it internally. We'll eventually share this out to the public. But when you have that data available to you, you need to understand what that means, and then also what are appropriate uses for this information. By having all that information together, accessible, using the tools to get to the end where we can actually learn something, we can actually communicate easier, we can communicate in ways that are understandable to a broad audience, not just a specific person who's a specialist in that area. Also, we learn about the city, and therefore we can see what would we like to collect or how would we like to change in order to improve. So it loops back to the front, back to create. So if we step through the individual parts to define what create, share, and understand are, I also want to call out some of the things that have been put into place to build a foundation by which we can move our create, share, and understand structure moving forward, and then we can become a more data-driven city. For example, one of the things that we do at the time when people are collecting information, we structure the databases, the new systems that we implement, or perhaps that we design in a way that is not only to satisfy the need of that individual business process, but also with our ultimate goals down the line. One of the things that we do to help that is with master data sets. We've created an enterprise addressing system so that links, we push out IDs and addresses throughout systems throughout the city so that it simplifies linking these two together. Again, the intentional proactive design of the systems and our solutions helps us down the line so that we can be more confident with the information and more confident in our decisions when we have a lot more information at our disposal to make those decisions. Once we collect the data, we need to know what we're going to, well, before collecting the data, we need to know what's appropriate use of this information, and that's why we define some of the data classification. We also identify who the stewards would be, and retention. How long should we keep this? So again, before collecting it all and finding out after the fact, we need to think through these things before bringing in the data so that it's appropriately and proactively designed. So when we move to our next share, which is how's the data accessed, used, protected, and exchanged at the city, this is where a lot of the basic foundational work has been put in. first thing that we did is IT created a center of expertise in the form of the group that I'm in, which is the Data and Analytics Services, which is a concentration of skilled data experts who can serve not only to create a proper platform, but also serve as consultants to help departments to access the data in proper manner. So with that group in place, one of the first things that we did is create what you see at the top of the pyramid, which is the Analytics Hub, an internal data mart which will pull information from systems throughout the city. This is a work in progress, so we're continuing to build this out, but it pulls information throughout the city, puts it into an understandable framework, and allows departments to see their data in the context of other data. So it creates the self-service reporting analytic location for people to come together. When it's in there, it breaks down the silos of the individual departments, it breaks down the silos of the individual business lines, breaks down the silos of the individual business systems that it comes through. It comes together in a single place, people have access to it, they can look at their data in the context of the data of other groups, and it gives us a fuller picture, and it leads, hopefully, to better efficiencies, better collaboration, and better work throughout the city. So once that data is in there, we need to make sure that people can look and understand what the data mean. So what we do is we've created a structure for a data dictionary that will work in conjunction with the departments to define what data elements mean, how is it used, or what are appropriate uses for that, so that when you look at these fields, you have all of these options to bring together to query, you have a better understanding of what does it mean, who can I reach out to if I have some questions about it. It's also in the center share area that we focus on how we protect. There's some information that's appropriate for a smaller group, some information that's appropriate for a broader group. By having this information in there, we become more confident, we understand our information, and it leads to better communication between departments, better communication to the public, and easier flow of information out to our public partners, whether it's other cities, whether it's the development community, or with other organizations. So again, we created that center of expertise, created the Analytics Hub with that center of expertise, and now we are making sure that Analytics Hub serves our needs and protects our data and teaches it the asset that we want it to be. Lastly is understand, and that's how the data is used, build awareness, and glean insights. So now that we have this all together and we can actually bring the information together, what can we learn from it? What can we see that we didn't see when we just did our single path, just did our single inspection, all this information together, we can learn more about ourselves. We can find out ways that we can communicate information between the departments, and then also communicate information to the public. What is the best way to share that out there? So we've created some tools that will help us with that. So there's some analytic tools, some visualization tools, mechanisms by which are more accessible. We also have the the open data portal, where we can put raw data sets out there. Researchers, developers can download the information and interact with that as they like, or develop that, move it into one of their systems, build an application off of it. But not everyone has those tools, so that we make sure that we have some dashboards that people can interact and actually ask questions of it, so it's accessible to a broader audience. So if we look at all of that create, share, and understand, we can move into an actual case of what we've used this framework for, and that's with the MPD dashboard, which is related to stop information. There was a need, obviously, to have a better understanding of some of the demographics of police stops. They should be more transparent, and we wanted to, not only internally, but externally, bring them together and actually create something on which we can have a conversation about that topic. So if we walk through that create, share, understand structure framework for this, we started off by saying, what is it that we needed in order to do a demographic study with police stop? We weren't keeping pre-incident and post-incident demographics. So in the create phase, we change our processes, we change our applications, we collect that data, so therefore that research and that sharing is possible. When we move into the share portion, we take the information that comes from the CAD 911 system with the additional data elements, and we pull it together in a way that anonymizes some of the information to protect the privacy of the subjects of the people who are stopped. But we make sure that all of the elements that are there so that this is a useful set of data. Also, we build in the automation so that the data is refreshed on a regular basis. What you're looking at here is actually an assessment from the ACLU about what we rolled out at the time of the rollout. So if you look, it compares other larger cities and what they share. The thing that we did is we shared the information, we gave the location, had all the fields, we refreshed it on a regular basis, and that creates a better conversation. Lastly, now that it's out there, we have different options. We have this information, so how do we want to communicate? There's a portion who just wants the raw information and can interact with it that way. Others would like to have some tools to help out with that communication. Both of them are very important mechanisms in order to share. They're both important audiences. So what we did is, while simultaneously putting the raw data set on the Open Data Portal, we created this dashboard that you see on the screen here that allows people in the public to interact and ask questions of it as they like, and they can narrow down whether it's by area, time, or some of the basic information about the stop. And then that opens up a conversation. Instead of just giving you, here's a prose report on what happened, here it is, you look at it, and then we can have a conversation back and forth, and you see reality is not based on just presumptions. So walking through that, you can see how the framework can be used for us to collect the data, store it, protect it, and also create relationships and understandings and be driven more towards a data-driven city, creating better relationships with our partners, publics, the other within departments, and as we move forward. So as you look at bringing this all together, you see, here's the environment that we're trying to serve with our data. Here's the simple process that the framework that we would like to move forward with in order to improve our state of data. So the foundation has started, we just need to move it forward and actually buy into and build it out going forward. So at the end, we get rid of our problems of doubt of the data or concerns about, or realities about not having the data accessible both internally and externally, and then not knowing what the information is. We can pull it together, be informed, we can have data-driven decisions, we can be more informed in our decisions, we have a free and included public, and we can continue to move forward, put our goals in terms of what we would want to do, from aspirational things like we would like to learn more about this, we'd like to improve our programs, and then we can move to that point. But again, it's based on a simple framework that we want to implement, and hopefully you see the value in that. So next, we can have Andrea Larson once again about one of the implementations of it.
Thanks, Arrow. So as Arrow mentioned, there's been a group convening to put this report together. It's been a real opportunity to have data folks around the city convene to talk about our current state and where we want to go next. At the same time, an opportunity has arisen to move this work forward, and so I'll talk about that. It's with a partner, What Works Cities. Now, we have partnered with What Works Cities in the past. We had a first sort of round with them. For those of you who don't know, What Works Cities is a Bloomberg-funded consortium of experts on a variety of data-related topics. They provide technical assistance to cities on the topics that they are the most knowledgeable about. Their initial goal was to advance the use of data in 100 mid-sized cities. Minneapolis was part of this first initiative, which included a light assessment. So they came in and assessed us on a variety of data initiatives in the city based on a survey, a pretty comprehensive survey that we filled out, looking at 4 categories, which you'll see on the screen on the left. And then provided targeted assistance to us in areas where we needed or wanted help and where they were able to provide that help. So the two areas that we received assistance from them on was with Results Minneapolis, looking at performance analytics. And we did work with Johns Hopkins Center for Government Excellence. And then we also completed a project earlier this year looking at ways to improve procurement practices with Harvard's Government Performance Lab. Both of those were 2 to 3 month long, pretty intensive engagements with these technical assistance providers. They went really well for us and for What Works Cities. We partnered together quite well. And so as What Works Cities has met their goal of assisting 100 mid-sized cities, they are now exploring what a second phase of work looks like. Since the experience working together for both of us went so well, we've been asked to participate in the next phase of work with them and actually defining what sort of What Works Cities 2.0 looks like. To enter into this next phase of work, we have to complete a What Works Cities certification. The certification process includes a validated assessment, meaning that we completed and answered a survey and provided evidence of our responses, and then they go through and actually validate our responses to those questions. The certification provides us with a helpful framework to assess our state of data and allows us to benchmark ourselves with other cities of our size and all the cities who complete certification. As a part of the certification process, What Works Cities is committed to work with us to provide a roadmap going forward, as well as some additional support that will help us become certified and improve our certification level in the next couple of years. So what's exciting about this is that we're exploring what this 2.0 version looks like, which means it may not just be the 2 to 3 month sort of intensive engagement, but on areas where we need more help, they may, and we're looking at entering into longer term support, which is great to help us actually stand up some of the work. And then in areas where we are advanced or doing well, it may look like connecting us with other cities to make some small tweaks or actually share our own successes with that network that they are in the process of developing. We have just received a draft report earlier this week. So what you'll see on the right is an example of what we will be getting back from them. It assesses us across a variety of areas: open data, data governance, performance analytics, low-cost evaluation. You can read those. And then it'll help us identify where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, and how we want to move forward. So all of which is to say, this is just going to be a really great tool for the team that's been convening to pick up and continue building on all of the work that we've already done and have a structured way to move that forward with some external support to help us do that.
And Madam Chair and council members, just to close out, again, you know this is our first ever State of Data report, and we're very eager to move the work forward and bring future reports in front of the council to talk about what progress we're making on a number of fronts. But this first report is, of course, representing exactly how we concluded the written report. It's the beginning of a dialogue. So this is between departments across the enterprise, with you, our policymakers, and through you and with you, with the communities that we serve. So with that, we've concluded our formal presentation. The entire team is available to respond to any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. And I did want to wait until the end, not because there aren't a lot of interesting pieces and parts to every piece of this presentation. I'll start with Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And thank you, everybody, for this presentation. I think there's actually a lot of really exciting things going on. I think a lot of the data-driven decision-making that we're moving towards, the dashboard work that I think is really empowering to our residents to be able to see some of this data for themselves without necessarily having to make data requests, to be able to see this stuff in the aggregate and access these things is a really positive direction. So I'm excited about a lot of that. I think I've also seen over the course of my first year in office here, opportunities for us to provide some additional guidance in some particular areas. And I think if you think about sort of the genesis of the way we're using data, we've identified it as an asset, and we've sort of approached data security from a perspective of protecting it from outside people trying to access it who we wouldn't want to access it. But we haven't necessarily put the controls in place. In many ways, the most likely place for a misuse of data is going to be from somebody who we would give the password to and give access to that. So, for example, we've been having a very robust conversation about data privacy in the context of municipal ID and in the context of what are we able to protect. If people voluntarily give us their data, then we have it, and we have a set of state rules that we have to follow about what we would disclose and to whom, and particularly to law enforcement agencies, which is almost always the one of the exceptions about who gets data, even when it's really classified as private. So it feels like there's a kind of robust area of work. But one thing in particular I wanted to ask is sort of how do we decide internally as a city how we use data that we have? Who's authorized and how do we justify that? Can we talk about sort of what guidance we have? So, and I'll give you a couple of examples that I think are helpful to sort of understand this. So I'm aware, for example, we're investing in a CRM system for the council to use. And I think for a lot of people, there would be a huge benefit to that. For us to be able to keep better track of our conversations so that if somebody calls us about an issue that they're facing, we can make a record of it, and we have that personally identifiable information to say, oh yeah, we helped them with this issue where the business across the street was putting garbage in their lawn or something, and then when they call 3 months later and say it's happening again, we aren't starting from scratch, right? And so tracking that data is a good thing. However, if they disclose to us something that made them vulnerable in some way, I guess I have a question about how much at what point would we expose people who call a council office to say, I'm worried about this and I'm undocumented, and we record that, and then we've made them vulnerable in the data even internally to other departments within the city. And then how much do we proactively share some of that out? I know, for example, we got license plate scanners for reg services, and the purpose of those license plate scanners was to be able to enforce 2-hour parking, which is a really good thing. We don't chalk tires anymore. That was always a really burdensome process and something we very rarely enforced. But what we've set up as a sort of automated system then is that data, somewhere in the data architecture, we decided to house that with MPD. And then MPD has automated processes that will search that license plate data. These are people who did nothing wrong. We have no reason to believe they did anything wrong. They're parked illegally on the street. We're searching them against the warrant list and the scofflaw list and some other things as a matter of practice, right? And so we've made a decision somewhere in the data architecture about how to use that data across departments and maybe for purposes different from what we would have authorized the data gathering for. And so I guess I'm curious, what kinds of guidance currently exist, or is this really an area where we need to dig in more? How do you currently approach that question?
Madam Chair, I'll take a start at what were probably multiple questions and issues there, and I'm going to try and answer it as briefly and succinctly as I can, knowing that that's not my forte. I would start by saying that the first thing that drives who, as an employee, or what departments have access to data should be driven by their business need for such data. So those are a whole set of criteria about what business need do you have for accessing what data you may have. There also is, of course, the application of the laws that talk about who and under what conditions can have that that data, and how that data is classified, whether it is public data, whether it's private confidential data on individuals, or whether it's not public data on not individuals. And so an understanding of the data classification is critical. The understanding of business need for data within that data structure or classification is critical, and all of that has to come before then we start building systems with architecture and fields to fill out. A lot of that, as I mentioned, has happened in a siloed environment to now, where departments largely drive that themselves, and there isn't necessarily an enterprise engagement across how those systems are designed and built and the data that's collected and gathered. So by really looking at that structure that Mr. Kilkson put forward, which is that how we create data, and really focus on that first step, As an enterprise, having the Information Governance Policy Committee involved and providing oversight of the enterprise so that there is a critical juncture where the enterprise comes together, represented by the responsible authority, the city clerk, the city attorney, who's the chief legal officer, the city coordinator, who is in charge of all the management functions of the city, and the chief information officer, and having under that umbrella of the IGPC a series of work groups that have already been created to look at things like data management, risk exposure, incident controls, things that we need to really explore and either strengthen what we have or fill gaps that may exist. So at a high level, it's really understanding the data classification, who has a business need to access it, making sure that we understand all of those things so that as we build or implement new systems, we're following the law and those business needs, and then reinforcing all of that with training so that the employees who use the systems, back to Mr. Kilkson's point, it's about people, not systems per se, that the people who have to use these systems are informed on what they should be gathering and why they should be gathering it, and then whether or not they have a need to know. I'm not sure if the city attorney or the city coordinator might add to that. I think that's a high level.
Thank you, Nuria Rivera-Van, my city coordinator. I'd only add to that, I think our city clerk said it succinctly, but say that I think we are at a point where we're thinking about those gaps. And the reality is that we have not, across the enterprise, often thought about the use. We thought about how to collect it. We've thought about how to make sure it is accurate and that it's reliable. We've thought about transmitting it. And now we're at a point of maturity, as was mentioned earlier, about how do we really make sure that we're using it with intentionality and that we're storing things and that we're retaining and that we are not putting people either at risk or we're not using it for different purposes that perhaps we as a policy group have not thought of. And at some point, I believe that we will be coming to policymakers because we may need additional conversations about what can we and what cannot we use data for. But I believe, as the city clerk was mentioning, that will come from this newly established, refreshed group of folks really looking at data in different ways.
I don't see any other questions, but there are more from Councilmember Fletcher and myself, so maybe he and I will just trade here for a while, if that's okay. Mr. Carl, you spoke of the IG ordinance, and that's something that when we put that together, we made some assumptions and we knew where we wanted to steer how we would think about information governance in our city. Could you, given that now we have this body of work and this report in front of us, could you help me understand some of the key differences between what we used to have, the enterprise information management policy, and this ordinance? And do you still think the IG ordinance is better, and why is that?
Madam Chair, yes, I do, actually. And one of the key reasons I think that distinguishes what we currently have in the Information Governance Ordinance, separate from what existed previously as the Enterprise Information Management Policy, is the fact that it is an ordinance. It's owned by the council and has been codified. When the audit was conducted in 2015, one of the things that I mentioned, it said, is there's not a governance framework for accountability in place. We had a policy. We weren't following it. And it wasn't at the level where council felt a sense of ownership of that. It wasn't an ordinance, which is, of course, our highest level of the council in acting its policies. So I think that key distinction, when we reached out after the audit and talked to some of our jurisdictions that we compare ourselves to, or jurisdictions that we like to benchmark against, they all had an ordinance that said at a policy level, this is how the governing body expresses that it believes data is an asset and how it should be used and managed, and we didn't. And so having that as an ordinance that prescribes a process, a framework, vests in the policy committee certain responsibilities and outcomes, and requires an annual report to this body so that you have that line of sight accountability, those are, for me, some key distinguishing differences between what had existed previously and what is now in place that I think ensures regular reporting, accountability and follow-up, and mechanisms in place that bring the right departments to the table to provide that enterprise coordination and oversight.
Thank you. And then What Works Cities is an interesting piece. I've been aware of it in the Results Minneapolis work for the past couple of years. And that partnership is exciting. It's important as we work toward not just matching ourselves up against other cities and wanting to benchmark. I mean, we're we're here talking about how we scored 1.6 on a 5-point scale. Maybe that IG ordinance gets us to 1.7, but it doesn't get us very far without the other hard work that goes into it. At a high level, could you give us some examples of some outcomes that we could achieve in this next round of that partnership?
I'm going to ask Ms.
Yeah,
Larson to respond to
I was
that.
going to say, I guess this question is for Ms. Larson.
Yeah, Chair Palmisano. Yes, I can. So we have, because this is a 2.0, and they're testing it with us, we've actually started some work already based on results from the last assessment, which is that in terms of low-cost evaluation, the city of Minneapolis ranks pretty low relative to other cities. And so we have an opportunity to improve how we are using evaluation tools from an enterprise perspective in the city. We have pockets of it around, but really looking at how we evaluate our programs in a more thorough way. And so we have actually started working already with the Behavioral Insights team, which is an organization based out of London. They have an office in New York. They have lots of great examples of work that they've done with other cities in terms of looking at evaluation. And some of that includes true sort of program evaluation, looking at what your intended outcome is, and then the process that you use to arrive at that outcome and figuring out how you're actually doing and achieving your outcomes. They also do a lot of work on A/B testing. And so one of the examples, I forget what city it's from, they looked at police recruiting and the letters and communications that went out recruiting people to be police officers, and changed the language in their recruitment communications collateral. They did random sampling and sent 3 different letters out. One was the original and then 2 different versions. And I can't remember the exact figures, but with the city that they were working with, they got back, I think it was like double or triple the amount of interest and actually applications from communities of color and women on one of the samples. And then they knew that that was sort of the model that they should move forward with. So they have a lot of examples, demonstrable examples of work that they've done with other cities that have produced really great outcomes. And so we have actually started exploring work with them because we know that that's an area of opportunity for improvement for us. We have not yet selected what we would focus on in the city. They generally want to pick sort of specific project, but again, they're exploring what type of engagement. So it may be selecting a specific project to work on in addition to looking at sort of our enterprise approach on low-cost evaluation as well. So I'm really excited about that opportunity.
Cool. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. One of the other areas that's been really interesting to me in thinking about this is data that's gathered in public-private partnerships by third-party vendors or private entities. And I think that's something that we're seeing as a trend around the country. I've had many vendors in my first year in office here come in and pitch me on really cool things they can do for our city that they'll do for free because they see data as an asset as well. And the data that they can gather by offering interactive wayfinding kiosks or smart parking meters or whatever kind of cool app that will help us do some cool thing in our city. Which, by the way, have really cool things about them. I mean, I would love to live in a world where I pull up to a parking meter and I don't have to worry about paying for it because it just knows who I am and knows my preferred payment method, and I don't have to worry about how long am I going to park here and all that stuff, right? Like, it's very cool. So we want to think about how do we take advantage of these cool technologies, but also how do we govern that data? And so I think in relationship to that, one of the things about a responsible authority is that we're supposed to have a really good inventory of the data that we collect. And I guess I'm wondering both, what's the state of our current inventory for within the enterprise? And then where do we draw the boundaries? Do we have a decent inventory of the data that's being collected about our residents on our behalf as a result of contracts that we're engaged with, for example, our parking app and Nice Ride?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, the data inventory required under state law to be maintained is regularly reviewed by the clerk's office in partnership with the departments. At a very high level, we're required to disclose what types and elements of data we collect and maintain. It's not down to the level of which application is collecting and maybe maintaining or generating and sharing and exchanging what data with other elements or other systems. So our data inventory is current and in compliance with the law. The more interesting question is, how do we use that inventory then to potentially help us at that policy level? To your original question, in terms of how do we design systems and know that we have trust and assurance in how the data is being collected and used for the appropriate purposes. And again, I think the answer there is that's a space we're moving into. As the city coordinator mentioned, we are now entering that space where we as staff are having those discussions. You as policymakers are having those discussions. We are together having those discussions to make sure that we are all in alignment on the data that the city collects, either as a department or as an enterprise, is being collected in a way that is within the law and within that law, within our expectations as a policy, to make sure that we're serving the business needs and not contributing to something else. And so I know we have had those conversations as well, Councilmember, and we continue to have conversations across departments and certainly at that focal point with the IGPC committee that talks about this very issue about how do we start to address who has what and what are they using it for and what do we not want them to be using it for.
Thank you. Being a data-driven enterprise means having the capacity to create and also understand data. And this report seems to indicate that the city has some capacity, but that capacity might be stretched. I don't know too many people that work with Mr. Kilkman. So what are some practical considerations that we could take in terms of strengthening or building on that existing capacity, just from your perspective?
I'm certainly welcome to hear from the team, but very high level, broadly, I would say that we have started those conversations, the team that came together from multiple departments to produce this first report. And one of the things that we did, Madam Chair, was decide early on that while we were tasked with bringing forward recommendations, we thought we would hold back from that a bit. And the reason why is in respect of where we are in the process. This report was originally due much earlier in the year and would have allowed us to perhaps bring forward some more concrete, tangible recommendations that could have helped us at this point. But because we are so late in the year in the budget process as well, it was our hope that we could get this report done and to use a phrase, set the table, as it were, with policymakers, knowing that there are both recommendations that we would bring forward that would have cost implications, but also some that maybe don't have cost implications and are purely policy driven. And all of those would come forward in due time. We were not prepared then to come forward today, perhaps, to say that, but it is certainly something that we are excited to bring back to this committee.
Chair Palmisano, I'll also add to that that there are some other good things happening that sort of reinforce the focus and effort on data. One of those is the Data Co-op, which is a great group of, it's an analyst-driven group, a group of analysts across the city who get together to share learnings with each other, to talk about being an analyst in the city, to talk about data. They are exploring ways to build their own skills, to work on different projects, and so that's a really, it's along the lines of an employee resource group, but more skills based, and that's been a really great sort of employee-driven tool to increase capacity of analysts, cross-departmentally. So that's been exciting to watch.
In that co-op, just to be clear, that's just for people that already work within the city,
correct,
not with other people. Oh, okay.
Correct. Yep. The other thing I would add to that is that your questions and focus on data helps the organization respond with data. And so it's sort of a positive feedback loop. The more that we are all asking for and using data, the more we will ask for and use data. And a lot of that is already happening, I think, from my own experience watching results start to get, results data start to get integrated into the budget process is certainly one example of how we're starting to use data to make and inform decisions. I'm excited about seeing that work move forward next year. But I think that's one of the best tools we have actually to increase our own capacity is to have our leadership and, both elected and otherwise ask for and use data.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense that we ask for more data as we make policy decisions up here. Councilmember, did you have any other further questions? This is a big report. We've asked for staff recommendations on how to drive an enterprise in change as to how we can leverage data. I didn't see any clear recommendations, as you pointed out, in the report. So I do invite staff to come back and give us some ideas on how we can advance this goal with a list of recommendations sometime in the future and how we might accomplish this vision that you've identified in the report. So this is our first annual report. I guess, Mr. Carl, from your perspective, are there any improvements we can anticipate seeing in this report the next time around next year?
Madam Chair, one of the things that we had hoped to include in this year's report, and unfortunately we're not able to, but I think by next year, and certainly with the feedback we get from our partnership with What Works Cities, is we'd like to develop some enterprise-wide performance metrics to share that really show in a measurable way how we are using data and how successful we are in driving data-driven decisions and making our operations across the enterprise more reflective of that information and that use as a resource internally, and how we also make it available to our partners externally to the organization. So that would certainly be a goal for future reports, is bringing those metrics back that provide tangible proof of our work.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just put in a plug. I did a couple of months ago offer a notice of intent to work on the data privacy aspects of this. And so in the meantime, between reports, and I want to kind of put it out there to the world that if there are people who have an interest in this topic, who are finding these questions interesting, I want to encourage people to contact my office and just really think about all the different ways that data privacy has an impact on our residents. So that'll be work that we can look forward to moving into the future. And then as long as we're talking about data, I just want to note that there are some gaps that are created for us by the legislative environment that we're in. Minnesota's data practices policy is sometimes challenging, and we have a new crop of legislators who, as they're looking at projects they might want to take on in their first term, I want to just encourage them to get in touch with me about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the staff, especially you, Mr. Kilkson. Those that have come to my office, and anyone's welcome to stop in my office and see the example of how that police dashboard was built and all of the different systems and pieces that had to get fit together to bring that up and to make it run. It shows the vast amount of work that goes into building those dashboards in a thoughtful way. So thank you for all of your efforts. Now that we've heard about all of the ways our enterprise creates and compiles and consumes data, we have to be transparent. And now the next item on our agenda is to hear about a particular case regarding data protection and data leaks. Here to present on the June 14th data breach on an OPCR draft report is, Mr. Carl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, my name is Casey Carl, I serve as City Clerk. And it's in that capacity as City Clerk that I also serve as the city's designated responsible authority under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. Among other duties required of me as the responsible authority, I am required, pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13.055, to investigate potential breach of any data classified by state laws being private or confidential data on individuals. On June 14th this year, the potential of a breach involving private or confidential data was brought to the attention of my office. Assistant Clerk Christian Rummelhoff, who undertakes the duties of responsible authority as my deputy and primary designee, conducted the required investigation related to this potential breach, and he's here today to report the findings of that investigation. Before he presents his report, I'd like to provide some context about the focus of our investigation. This investigation was never about who might have created a breach. Rather, our focus has been on systems and processes, how data was created or collected, who had access and for what business purpose, how the data was shared during the drafting stage, and similar matters. The point of these investigations is driven by our obligation, as I've already said, to ensure that data is by law classified as private or confidential and not subject to disclosure, and that we have a duty to securely protect that data. A breach clearly indicates a breakdown or a failure in the system or process. Yes, There can be consequences to individuals who deliberately create a situation where government data classified as private or public is breached. That's a possibility, but it does not focus our efforts, and it did not do so in this case. From the beginning, Mr. Rummelhoff focused his investigation on identifying where system breakdowns occurred and how we might ensure those types of failures don't reoccur in the future. With that said, given the fact that this investigation involves private, confidential data on individuals, we cannot provide details or specifics that were involved. The report will provide high-level summary data which can be made public. We will attempt to address all the facts of the investigation and explain our conclusions. We cannot, however, as I've said, go into details about the case and appreciate the committee's understanding of those limitations on what we can and what we cannot disclose. And with that, I'll ask Mr. Rummelhoff to present his report.
Thank you. Mr. Rummelhoff, thanks for coming.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, as Mr. Carl said, I'm Christian Rummelhoff. I'm the Assistant City Clerk, and I lead the Records and Information Management Division in the Clerk's office. So this June, as you recall, the city was notified that a copy of a draft report developed by the Office of Police Conduct Review within the city's Civil Rights Department was obtained by the news media. Because the draft report was a program audit, it's classified as not public data under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. That's the state law which controls who can access data and under what circumstances. So under this law, unauthorized acquisition of data maintained by a government entity that compromises the security and classification of the data is considered a data breach. When there is a potential data breach, we, the clerk's office, the responsible authority, but we as a city need to first understand what has occurred. So we determine the scope of the incident, what information was potentially compromised, and whether that meets the definition of a data breach under the law, technically. Next, we look at whether individually identifiable information was affected, and if so, whether the law requires we provide notice to those individuals whose information was compromised. Finally, we review what happened. We look at exactly really what occurred and how can we learn from that to reduce the risk of future data breaches. So, we've been fortunate enough to not have conducted many data breaches. So this unfortunately meant we didn't have a formal incident response procedure in place when the event occurred. We leveraged any related procedures we had across the city that would be helpful, but we also were developing new material as we needed them. So we used a skilled attorney from a company called Nuvest to lead the fact-finding investigation. Nuvest is a private company that provides neutral workplace investigations. They're used elsewhere across the city, and so we were able to leverage an existing contract and mirror procedures in place in the city's human resources and NPD internal affairs departments. Nuvest provided the completed fact-finding report on October 18th. So the report that we have here today summarizes the findings of those facts. The detailed fact-finding report is not public because it largely contains interview data with employees. So, as I said, we look at three questions when we have a potential data breach. The first is, what's the scope of the incident? Here, we believe two documents were released to the news media. The first was a draft report of what was ultimately titled MPD Involvement in Pre-Hospital Sedation. The second document was a selection of transcripts from 8 body camera videos organized by MPD case control number. Prior to the investigation, we were not aware of the existence of the second document, but we knew additional material was involved in the release. The Star Tribune had submitted a request for certain police case control numbers not referenced in the draft report. In addition, the second article on June 17th contained quotes from body camera footage that were not included in the draft report. However, both the case control numbers and the additional quotes were present in the second document. We're not aware of any other information involved in the breach. So understanding the scope, we now look at the second question, whether the breach included individually identifiable information. So the draft report was always meant to be public upon final publication. It was drafted to obscure the identity of the people it talked about. The second document was never meant to be public. It was marked confidential. The transcripts contained first names of 2 individuals, and the provided case control numbers directly linked descriptions in the OPCR report to publicly available information in police records. And that includes the names of the individuals involved. So once the final report was published on July 26th, the draft report became public. To limit the impact of the breach, we withheld the police case records that were requested for those 8 cases until the final report was published. Thereby, we didn't compound the amount of information that was out there. Nevertheless, under a conservative interpretation of the breach statute, private data on 2 individuals has potentially been breached. Their details were redacted from the final report that the OPCR had made public this summer. These 2 individuals are being notified of the potential breach and will be provided a copy of the data incident report. The final question that we ask in the incident investigation is really, how did it occur, what happened, and how can we learn from this to reduce the likelihood of future incidents? So first of all, we did not determine who provided the data to Star Tribune. The key goal of the breach investigation is to determine what occurred so we can learn how to do better in the future. The investigation found that there were measures in place to protect the draft report while it was being developed and while the analysis was being conducted. These included maintaining drafts on secured file sharers, restricting access to just the people in the OPCR's, the division of civil rights that was working on this, the OPCR. Later, they maintained sensitive documents, such as the transcript document, on removable storage devices, and these were physically transferred as needed between people working on the project. Finally, they controlled physical access using locked doors, cabinets, and offices to control who had access to any paper copies. The investigation did find that there were no formal measures in place to protect distributed copies of the document once the report was shared with stakeholders. So these largely are paper copies that were presented to people during meetings, both internal within the city and external partners. The OPCR has since established additional control processes to prevent unauthorized dissemination of draft audit data, even when it's being shared with a limited group of stakeholders. These are described in detail in the document OPCR Research and Study Controls, which they included as Appendix 6 to the final version of their report. Director Corbel here will provide a few more details on this in a moment. The other thing that I'd like to say is one thing that we've learned and one thing that we're looking towards is, you heard at the State of Data report, the Information Governance Policy Committee is now in existence and has met. One of the things that has happened this summer is they created an information risk management work group. This group is tasked with developing an information risk management policy and related procedures, and that'll include incident response procedures. Hopefully they can build upon the work that we did this summer to create a process which we'll be able to use in future incident responses. And before yielding to Director Corbel, I'd like to thank the investigator from NUVES, Margaret Weston, Steve Kennedy in Patience Ferguson in Human Resources, Deb Parker in IT Security, Sergeant Lane and Lieutenant Wheeler in NPD Internal Affairs, and especially Carol Bashoon in the City Attorney's Office. They all provided invaluable support. And finally, I'd like to commend Director Corbel and her team. Their participation in the investigation was invaluable, and it came even as they were working to finalize the report. To their credit, they developed and implemented the additional changes that Director Corbel will be talking about very rapidly. So that concludes my remarks, and I'll yield to Director Corbel.
Thank you. It's really important that we make certain we have the proper policies and procedures in place to protect sensitive information. Director Corbel.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Velma Corbel, and I'm the director in the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights. I don't want to miss this opportunity to thank again the Office of Police Conduct Review team headed by Director Imani Jafar for the solid work they did on the report on pre-hospital sedation, which has led to several positive changes for both the Minneapolis Police Department and the Department of Civil Rights. As we know, the report's subject matter and its recommendations piqued interest around the country, and I look forward to hearing about the changes Hennepin Healthcare is making, as they ensure that Minneapolis' residents' civil rights are protected when community members are treated to the high-quality health care they deserve and that we know Hennepin Healthcare is capable of. As has been stated by Mr. Rommelhoff, in late May of this year, the then draft report of MPD involvement in pre-hospital sedation was distributed to several internal staff per the protocols that were in place at that time. When the draft audit report was released to persons external to the city and subsequently was obtained by the Star Tribune in mid-June, the Office of Police Conduct Review immediately moved to put more rigorous controls in place to safeguard its protected non-public audit reports. The Office of Police Conduct Review's updated document control procedure is included as an appendix in the final report and was developed after consulting with the city's internal auditor, the city attorney, and the city clerk. And you have copies of that document that's been passed out. There's also a copy available to the public. Again, that is an appendix in the final report approved by the City Council on July 26th. The new process includes a variety of protections. For example, customized, personalized watermarks, data encryptions on our mobile devices, password protections on our flash drives and other digital portable digital media, destruction of working drafts, and sign-offs that include notice to the document holders that they have a duty to protect confidential or protected non-public data. I believe all the stakeholders have had an opportunity to learn from this incident, and staff has taken the necessary steps to prevent an unauthorized disclosure from happening in the future. As I said again, we acted immediately upon learning that this unauthorized disclosure had happened, and we will certainly look to improve and refine our procedure as necessary. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, before closing, I wanted to end by offering a few observations myself. First, it's important to remember this is the first significant data breach we've dealt with, as Mr. Rummelhoff said. And so it set a precedent in terms of how we responded. We learned a lot in the process ourselves, and we look forward to using the experience, as Mr. Rummelhoff said, with the Information Governance Policy Committee and its working group of subject matter experts to really refine how we deal with data breaches going forward and making sure that our processes are in place to address those types of breaches moving forward. Second, I want to echo what Mr. Rummelhoff said by commending Ms. Corbell and the Civil Rights Department for their swift action in addressing systemic problems that were identified as part of our investigation. At every step in the process, the OPCR and the Civil Rights Department, led by Ms. Corbell, cooperated with us, gave us every access we needed in order to complete our investigation, as did all of the other departments that were involved in this investigation. But immediately, the Civil Rights Department made changes, as she outlined, and a copy of which you have, to make sure that their process was solid going forward. I know they continue to follow those new steps and procedures going forward, so their swift action and their cooperation and partnership with us is appreciated very much. Thelma, Imani. And finally, I want to express my appreciation to Mr. Rummelhoff, who shepherded this entire investigation forward and provided a consistent standard throughout to focus our collective attention on processes and systems and not people. And it was his professionalism that ensured that the city conducted a thorough assessment of the situation and that we were able to put in place measures to address the challenges that we found, both in the immediate short term and for the long term as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me that there's a tension between sharing information with stakeholders and knowing that creates the potential for data to travel. So I understand how that can happen. Did we share the transcript document with those stakeholders? Because I know we shared the draft report. But it sounds like the transcript document that actually really constituted the data breach in terms of private data I'm curious if we shared that in those same meetings or in that same context with stakeholders.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, so I'll start by saying we can talk very little about the details of the investigation. Both documents were shared at different stages. They came into existence at different times, but towards the end of the process, when we got nearer to when the breach occurred, there were copies of both documents.
Anything else? Thank you. Next, we will hear from our Communications Director, Greta Bergstrom, about the current status of our city's digital services portal project. As we're talking about data and transparency, it's also important to discuss how city residents access that data. It's not enough just to publish data, but also present it in a way folks can see and they can consume in an easy manner. So thank you for taking charge of how we share it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Palmisano and council members. I'm Greta Bergstrom, the city's communications director, and am excited to be here this afternoon to present the Enterprise Committee with the second status report outlining the work to date on the city's new digital city services portal, otherwise known as our new public website. The last report made to this committee was on June 7th. The new public website is a crucial piece of communications infrastructure, as you mentioned, for the enterprise, which we know and expect will help transform how we communicate with our residents, businesses, and visitors. A big part of this enterprise effort is helping to ensure that the city, through the new website, is both accessible and inclusive to people with disabilities, as well as to people and residents from other cultures. Before I dig in, I would like to recognize the ongoing work of our steering committee, which includes City Coordinator Nuria Rivera-Vandermeide, Robin Hutchinson, our Public Works Director, City Clerk Casey Carl, in addition to Otto Dahl from IT and myself. I would also like to recognize the roughly 60-some city staff, the web content owners from across departments across the enterprise who've been working closely with our department in communications and with IT to make sure that our content is revised, more accessible, and really transformed as we move forward. So we want to make it easier, obviously, and more meaningful for our residents to interact with the city by providing a truly user-centered experience, task-based content, visual content, and site architecture. And we want to base our decisions, as we have been through this project this year, on data and what our users are looking for to accomplish on the site. We also want to lay a foundation for the city to put us at the forefront of other local governments in website design, accessibility, and the user experience. What we've done so far over the last year of our work with our web content vendor, Clockwork, much has been accomplished. Some of the key highlights have included having interviewed staff across the city and the public, including those with diverse backgrounds and those with disabilities. We have worked with city staff to review existing content and expire, abandon, duplicate, and unused content. I should say that when we first started the content cleanup work with our content owners, we had more than 16,000 web pages and 42,000 PDFs on our current site. As of today, I'm proud to say that we've reduced this to just under 10,000 pages and 36,000 PDFs. So you can see we have a lot of work still to come, but we have made a lot of headway, and there's been lots of staff work that's gone into that. We've also had the chance to conduct usability testing, putting our draft designs and the site architecture to the test with users from diverse backgrounds and those living with disabilities. We'll show you a short video a bit later in this presentation that speaks to their input and feedback and a little bit how we've used that. So where are we headed? How do you get from where we're at now to the site launch, which we expect at the end of next year, 2019, and then even beyond that? We plan to increase our site capabilities and audience experience as we move forward to launch, improving the content, the tools, content workflows, and focusing squarely on user experience and the data that we have at hand. Post-launch, we will look to reintegrating some project and department sites that are not currently embedded within the city's website, and we'll be retiring some old systems. So that's just a little bit of post-launch work that would be happening. In terms of anticipated results, our overall objectives for the new site include increased visits, mobile usage, and engagement, getting people really the information they need as soon as possible. We want to get them right to what they're on our site looking for. And we seek to be truly intuitive for our users, again, putting ourselves in their shoes as to what they're coming to the site to visit. And then we want to have a lot more self-service opportunities on the site. So we'll be building those in and enhancing those as we move forward in the project. For the public, this means ADA accessibility. So this is a core piece of that work. Easier access to tasks we know the public is looking to achieve, and clearer, more timely information. For city staff, we are looking for data-driven content, so we'll be continuing to bring that work into the website content. We want to reduce the workload for city staff, reduce the time to create, update, and manage content, and overall reduce cost moving forward. In terms of our content management system, the city will have a new content management system going forward. Terminal 4 was selected this fall through an RFP process, and as the new WCMS, we base this on a number of key factors. The first was their overall ability to meet the requirements of the city that we had put forth in the RFP. Second, their specialty really in the areas of government and higher ed. Their ability to meet a fast-moving, aggressive timeline to meet the needs of the city. Customization options and many existing features that they already had present within their system. And then they had obviously a very clear, well-organized and written proposal that was responsive to our needs. As of October, we do have a signed contract with Terminal 4 and are in the process now of kicking off the collaborative work and alignment. So change management is a topic that we talk about a lot at the city, and we know that change and evolution is often hard to do things differently, but we do need to do things differently where the website is concerned and where the web content is concerned. We understand that adapting content and working together in new ways to produce and refine existing content can be challenging, but our goal is for leadership and staff to embrace and use the new site as that launches. To that end, we've implemented some efforts to help staff with changes as we move forward. Our core team has attended monthly department staff meetings to brief individual departments on the website development process, to take questions and to answer key concerns. We continue to provide monthly updates to city staff in the biweekly Minneapolis Matters newsletter. We have active training and work sessions ongoing with our web content owners across the enterprise. And this past month in November, we held 2 sessions for department leaders, sharing the new designs and answering questions. And in a moment, we'll be sharing the homepage here with council as well. Next week, November 14th, we'll be holding a staff-wide design sharing session. We're also in the early stages of developing a governance plan for the site that will specifically dictate content needs and really help people with that. And we'll continue ongoing training with the content owners so they have the tools, the relationships, and the skills they need to succeed in producing user-friendly content for the new site. Just bear with me while I get this set up. We're going to take a look at the design preview, starting with with the home page as well. And what I'm going to show you as soon as we bring this up is the design, kind of the broad design direction for the new site that helps, again, intuitively as possible, provide structure and layout for the information that the city produces for the public. Our goal, as I've said, is to produce a user-centric navigation experience that doesn't require site visitors to really understand how we are set up, how departments are set up and where to go, but really takes it from what they're thinking in their brains and how they're coming to the site. Our goal always is to get them to the information that they need as quickly as possible. As you can see, bringing this up, and I should also say that the images and the icons and the content itself is still evolving, but this is a really good place in terms of where we're landing right now for this new site. And so what you see right here is the homepage, and I'll kind of walk you through this. I think we've really kind of achieved an accessible, user-friendly, clean design while still creating some visual interest through photography. You'll notice that there's now, so unlike our current city site, we really don't have a lot of photography, or hardly any or no photography. What we've heard loud and clear from staff and from people around the city is that they want to see themselves. They want to see the city in our site. It would be a driver for them to come to the site. If they don't see themselves, they don't feel a part of that. The city's graphic standards color palette has been evolved a little bit for digital use, and this is specific to accessibility. We really want to achieve a little bit of a sharper visual contrast for those that might have some challenges in viewing the site and walking through that. At the very top, there is a bright yellow alert, and right now we have that set on snow emergency. I think it's one of the alerts that would probably be used most frequently, especially at this season. This is something, though, that can be used for any number of things. If there's an emergency in the city, an office closure, other city needs as well. You will notice front and center also, we have a big, bold search function. We don't really have a great feature on our current site, which we have also heard from feedback is not helpful. So we will be able to, and this has actually been one of the top considerations that we've put into the site. People can log any sort of keyword in, and within the site we'll have tagged content, and so that'll be a part of the process with our content owners. So if you type in snow emergency or adopt a pet or something like that, it will immediately pull you into options to go visit in the site. The navigation itself across the top, if you look at the top navigation bar, has evolved to support the new content strategy for the site. So again, very user-centric, prioritizing content for the public against residents, against business. I'll take it. So there's resident services, business services, things to do, getting around, and government, if you're looking for government. So in particular, instead of having department-specific labels, and there's places to get to departments as well, we want to make sure the information will always be cross-populated. We're thinking in terms of, if I'm a resident, and we can drop down on the resident services tab, there's things like jobs at the city, property and housing. Are you a renter? Are you looking to adopt a pet or need some help with animals and pets? Garbage and recycling, education. This was really pulled, I mean, this is all data-driven, pulled from Site Improve and from our current site, so we have a really good understanding of what the current site visitors are looking for. If we move over to business services, if you are a business, small or large, a developer, if you're just looking to pay a utility bill or looking for a particular program or initiative, there are drop-downs for those as well. Under things to do, this is really kind of the fun piece of the site. So this is for all people. You might be a visitor. You may be a resident looking to go out for dinner. You could be a business owner as well. We've got events, attractions, parks and recreation, and visitor resources. And we will, we can't show you this today, but we will be driving, for instance, like to meet Minneapolis for visitors. And so those will be their standalone sites, but we want to provide access directly to those sites, to those standalone sites. Getting around is really focused on, of course, getting around. So if you want to drive, if you want to bike, if you want to take a scooter, if you want to use public transit, we have various tabs that will connect people to the experience that they're looking for. Parking and driving, walking, biking, we want to be accessible to everybody equally. And then our government tab at the very end really focuses on hearing what we do. So you've got jobs at the city, jobs being the #1 driver of visitors to the site. We have a section for the mayor, for the city council, all the way down to individual departments, which you can click on, and those will be listed, so you can always still find the department you're looking for. Budget, history, get involved. So we have a lot of those tabs fully focused. In the main section here where it says, I want to, the section elevates at the top kind of if a site visitor might want, what they might want to do on the site. And these, again, are data-driven through Site Improve data. So we know that paying utilities, a water or trash bill, Setting up an automatic payment, we know that that is very high on the list of things that visitors to the site come for. Paying a parking ticket, again, applying for a job with the city. So we want to be as transparent as possible and accessible to current job openings so that people can come right to those, because we know they're landing on the homepage for that. And then adopt a pet as well. Really does drive a lot of traffic. There's a flexible extender on the end for more options, because we know there's even more things, and so we have some flexibility in that. But those 4 right now are definitely based on the data that we have. If we move down, we have an events section, which shows some featured events, then links off to the side for all events. And so those will be updated by the particular departments and web content owners driving those events. We do have a news feature also on the homepage, and so that would be developed in kind of chronological order, showing recent news, which also links off to a news listing page to provide some additional news options. If we move further down, we have city officials and departments, and so we are featuring prominently the mayor's office as well as city council, and then to the side we have a flexible extender to see all departments. Again, another option to reach the department that you need if you know which department you're going to, but we don't require people to understand what department they might need a license in, for instance, so they have those options up top. And then a feature that ties specifically to the city clerk's presentation on featuring open data. We do have a section front and center, because right now people have to kind of dig through the site to try to find that data or that dashboard that we might have. We want to help with transparency by putting it front and center. Because we know that this is the type of data people are using. So this will obviously be evolving, and we'll be adding more to that, but we want to make sure that we have that ever-expanding universe of dashboards and visualized data here for our visitors. And then as you move further down, there is kind of a placeholder section right now, kind of a flexible did you know section, and we can use that for different purposes as needed to really have a kind of call out feature for something important or relevant or seasonal that we think might drive some interest. And at the very, very bottom, in kind of this very dark gray, we will have the footer, which will showcase helpful quick links, contact information, and our social media information as well. And that is just a preview. We will be having, as I mentioned earlier, the design sharing session for all staff on November 14th for people to come and see a much more diverse range of interior pages. Now moving on to usability testing. I mentioned this before. In August, city staff from Clockwork conducted usability testing with 9 Minneapolis residents at a local testing firm. It was the first opportunity to test what we've done, gauge reactions to the draft designs and to the navigation, really figuring out, are you getting to the information you need based on what we've laid out so far in the site architecture. The testing luckily confirmed a lot of our decisions were the right ones and that the overall direction of the project was on point. It also gave us some feedback that we were able to use to tweak the designs and to make the user experience more robust and better. Here, I'm going to just play about a 1.5 minute video, and we'll make sure the audio's up, just giving you a sense of some of the feedback that we heard.
I like this version already better than the last version because it actually shows people in the community actually out in the community.
This seems nice because right away it's asking you, what can we help you find today? I would describe it as very accessible, readable, more community-oriented, more focused on residents of Minneapolis. It's just easy to navigate.
I like its simplicity. Obviously, in this day and age, we don't have a very long attention span. So getting exactly to what you want to get to as quick as you can get to it is probably the best for people. And I think my favorite thing about the whole thing is having a search bar right at the beginning. Because most people aren't going to take the time to search through everything. They're just going to type in whatever it is they're looking for. Yeah, I would expect City of Minneapolis, to be honest, and be up to date.
It's just more inviting it makes it like all the colors and stuff. It just gives you a good vibe of the city. I just like how much you can find on here. Yeah, I would actually consider going through here, and it might just be a lot of stuff that you don't see, like that you don't get when you're just Googling stuff, because that's so general, and you get a million options from there. Where here it kind of really narrows it down to what you're looking for. Like I really just want to see stuff from my city.
So you can see, again, we interviewed 9 members of community. 4 had a chance to view the desktop version. 5 had a chance to view what you saw there was the mobile version. I will say that the design is always evolving, and so those images and even to some degree the color palette will continue to evolve. We did have a wide range of ages from 25 to 65. 70% of participants reported income levels of less than $50,000 annually, and we did have a mix of ethnicities as well in the sample. I'm going to show you 2 kind of a long how we move forward from here, kind of a roadmap. This first roadmap is now through the next 6 months. There is a color-coded ledger here that kind of details the overall work products that will be taking place now through the end of April 19th, where we have our key milestone of content needing to be developed and approved for the new site. So again, the work of the staff around the enterprise refining and developing new content. The blue color is really the work being completed by the web content owners across the enterprise. The magenta, which you'll see here is a vendor photo shoot, is color-coded for external vendors that we will bring in this case, a photographer that will take photos and images that will be used on the website to really reflect the city that we are and the people that we are. And then the green, which speaks to the work of our vendors, including Clockwork and Terminal 4 content management system. And so you'll see that we are kicking off work with Terminal 4 right now in collaboration, and then we'll work with them on technical requirements and then move into development as we head through the winter and into the spring of next year. The biggest work right now and probably the biggest chunk of work across the enterprise will be the content development. It will be refining, it will be continuing to slim content down, continuing to put it in plain language to make it truly accessible for people. Right now we're at a much higher grade level and often very technical, and so we want to make sure that the information is not only available but truly accessible to people. The second piece is kind of next May through December of 2019. December of 2019 is our targeted launch date of the new site. Again, with the color coding, we will be spending a lot of the work specifically through June to the milestone of August 19th of entering the approved new content into our content management system with Terminal 4. Then we move into content migration. In the green, you'll see there's development work, accessibility and functionality testing. We'll be doing a lot of testing prior to our launch in December of 2019. We will also have vendors in place May and June to do translation of content into multiple languages. We will also have a couple photo shoots, again, making sure that we have all the images that we need for the new site. And then really in terms of next steps overall, the remainder of 2018, as I said, will focus on quality review of existing content, planning for the change management and migration, and aligning with Terminal 4, our new CMS partner. 2019 will focus on the content development and really transformation of that content, the migration, the implementation into our content management system, the front end, back end development, and then that pre-launch testing for functionality, accessibility, and acceptance. And ultimately, we'd like to end the year, next year, by launching a brand new site. That will be important to stress that once launched, the site will continue to be a living, breathing animal of information that will require care and feeding of this important digital asset for the city. We will be continuing to work on the governance of content and the website, and are hopeful that we will have a really useful, accessible new tool for the city. And that concludes my presentation. I can stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this preview. So I don't think I see any questions for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I do want to make a motion to receive and file all of the things that we have been part of today. So this is a motion to receive and file both the 2018 State of Data Report, the findings of the investigation to the data breach, the Digital City Services Portal Project update, and the City Coordinator's monthly update. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. We're done with our business and we stand adjourned. Thanks.